Hello, welcome back to another video. My name is Gemma and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in October. So in October I read 11 books and I DNF'd 1. So let's start with the DNF, shall we? So I DNF'd Toward Eternity by Anton Hur. Anton Hur is a very famous translator. He translates a lot of literature. This is his first novel and it is a sci-fi dystopian novel where we are following sort of a research institute and they have been able to, I believe, like bring people back from the dead or stop them from dying or something or other. I didn't get so far into it, but patient 0 or patient 1 or whatever it was has escaped from this institution and they are then looking for them. It was fine, I just wasn't in the mood for it. And you know when you're reading a book and just the writing style and the way that the story is constructed, you're just not in that headspace. That's where I was with that. I wanted something different, something more familiar, I suppose, to me. So I DNF that. Then, moving into 11th spot for the month, we have Cheshire Crossing by Andy Weir. So Cheshire Crossing is a graphic novel and Andy Weir is the very famous sci-fi author of The Martian and Hail Mary, Project Hail Mary. I read Project Hail Mary and adored it. I watched the movie of The Martian so many times. I absolutely adore it. And so when I saw that Andy Weir had a graphic novel, I was like, let's give that a go. So, a bit of background. Andy Weir actually wrote this as like a web comic, I believe, way before he became famous with his sci-fi novels. And so this is very much his early work, and he is looking at what happened to Alice from Alice in Wonderland, Wendy from Peter Pan, and Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz as they became teenagers after their adventures in sort of the classic books. And they all end up in this boarding house in England for children that are mentally disturbed, I suppose, but it turns out that they know about the magical powers of these girls and they're trying to bring them together. I really didn't like it. I really didn't like it. It was quite substanceless. The characters were not very easily distinguishable from each other. It felt like poorly executed YA. There was a little romance subplot that I gave absolutely zero shits about. And yeah, I just didn't like it. I just thought it was poor. Not even average, I thought it was poor. I was really disappointed. Don't recommend. Yeah, there's a lot better graphic novels out there, and Andy Weir should stick to writing sci-fi novels. In at number 10, we have The Burial Plot by Elizabeth Macneal. So I gave Cheshire Crossing 2.5 stars. The Burial Plot got 3 stars. I have seen this everywhere, and so I thought I'd give it a go. It's a new release, set in sort of Victorian London or Victorian England, about a young girl who runs away from home to avoid sort of forced marriage to an older man. And she thinks she'll be able to get a job as like a maid or a governess or something along those lines. Turns out not to be quite that easy, gets embroiled with some rather unpleasant people, but eventually does land a job as a maid and a governess to a young woman. And when she is working at this stately home, she convinces the man that lives there, the owner, the master of the house, who is a widower, to build a cemetery on his land to try and bring some more money back into the estate because it's struggling. So that's the broad sort of premise of the book. And you can see how it's sort of linked to the title, The Burial Plot, because they're building a cemetery on the land. But I'll be honest, I just didn't care. I felt like these characters were really quite 2D. I thought the plot was quite predictable. Yeah, there were a couple of twists in there, but I just didn't really care. I didn't like the main character, so it just didn't really work for me at all. I think the best thing about this book was the cover. I really liked the cover. But I don't know, I just feel like this is maybe something, this whole like Victorian London historical thing has been done quite a lot, so I want something really new and innovative when I read a book like this, and I just felt like I didn't get that, so yeah, meh, I would say. Then sticking with 3 stars, we have The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, which is a very famous sci-fi novel about a man who builds a time machine and goes back like goes forward, hundreds of thousands of years into the future and finds this new civilization that he then interacts with. So I've read this for VICTOBER. I thought it was fine. My problem with it was that it's a very short book. It's only about 100 odd pages. But there was quite a lot of build up at the beginning, and then I felt like it wasn't needed. Like, we could have gone almost straight into jump in the time machine, explore this new civilization a bit more in depth. That said, there were some scenes in it which were quite scary and disconcerting, and I really enjoyed those parts of it. But I just think that there were like smatterings of excellence in it, but there was quite a lot of fluff and padding around it. And for a book that's only 100 pages, I don't really see why that was needed, and I certainly didn't want it. Next we move to 3.5 stars, and I have a poetry collection which doesn't feature very often on this channel, but I read Crow by Ted Hughes, and I quite enjoyed this. It was pretty dark. But it was interconnected poems. So it's the story of this crow and grief, and they were quite dark, and yeah, I really quite enjoyed it. I would read that poetry collection again. I thought it was really quite interesting, and I felt like there were poems that I could understand. Quite often I read poems that just go way over my head. So yeah, really enjoyed this one, and I think if you are new into poetry, it's definitely one for beginners. So yes, I liked that. Then still on 3.5 stars, we have The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde, which is a play. So I read this and The Time Machine for VICTOBER, and this was recommended by Roz at Scally Dangling About the Books. She set a prompt for VICTOBER to read a play, and she said basically if you haven't read many plays or you don't know where to start, Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest is a great place to start. So I was like, fine, I haven't read it, let's give it a go. And I listened to an audio. I listened to like a full cast narration of it, and it was really funny. It was about effectively 2 men and 2 women and the men aren't quite who they say they are, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about who is who and who's married to who, and about the name Ernest. I'm not going to say too much about it because it will spoil it, but I did find myself chuckling away, particularly towards the end when all of these things started to unravel around the characters, and yeah, it was a fun time and quite short as well. So if you are not sure if Victorian plays are for you, I definitely would agree with Roz and recommend this one. It was a blast. Okay, we now move into 4-star territory, and we have my main man, Thomas Hardy. I read The Mayor of Casterbridge, which is my 4th Hardy. He is definitely my favourite Victorian author that I have read to date, and I enjoyed this one. So this starts off quite explosively with a man selling his wife and child to another man in a pub. And then we sort of fast forward like 20 years, something like that, 15 years, 20 years, and the wife and daughter return to England, and we see like the fallout of what happens when these characters return and their interaction with each other. And I very much enjoyed it. I think it was a little slow in places. It's definitely not my favourite Hardy. I would put Tess in that position for sure, but I did enjoy it. I enjoyed the ride. I thought it was interesting. There were some twists. Diddy Kong. There were some twists that I didn't see coming. There were some that I did see coming as well, but it was a fun ride. As always, Hardy gives us a lot of plot to dig our teeth into, and some very interesting, very morally grey characters. So yes, recommend that one. Then we move into 5th position, and we have This Tender Land by William Kent Krueger. A lot of people talk about this author. He is very well loved, particularly on BookTube. And this one follows 2 brothers who are living in effectively an orphanage, but it is a residential home for Indigenous children, and they've sort of just been plonked there. They're not Indigenous. And we see their life within this boarding school, and then they escape and they go up is it the Mississippi River? I don't know, some river. And it's sort of about their adventures trying to escape this life as they go up, and to find family and understand what family means to them, and is family like what you're born to, or is it not? And generational trauma comes into it as well. Go then. And yeah, at the heart of it, it's a coming of age story and an adventure story, and I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, but there were some really serious moments in there too, right? There were some heartbreaking moments, so it definitely had the right balance of both for me, and it had a fantastic historical setting, which is always a plus in my book. So yeah, I really, really like this book, and I would recommend to any historical fiction lovers out there. In 4th position, we have Horrorstor by Grady Hendrix, which was the FOMO Book Club pick for September and October. FOMO Book Club is a book club that I run with my friend Jack from Spread Book Joy, and we read one book every other month, books that we fear that we have missed out on. And yes, Horrorstor was the pick for this month, and we did a live show on Jack's channel. I'll link that below for you. And this was just so much fun. I think I described this in the live show as like a kebab, right? This book has very little like nutritional value or literary value or whatever you want to call it, but it was so good to eat. This is a horror story set in an IKEA style shop, and we follow a cast of characters who have to stay there overnight because weird things have been happening in the store overnight. It's not being caught on the cameras, so they stay overnight to see if they can understand what's going on, and things get horror-esque. I would say you can pick this book apart quite easily. The characters are not very well fleshed out. There's holes in the plot. There's characters making stupid decisions. But it was the most compulsive book I've read this year. I could not put it down. I lapped it up and I enjoyed every second of it. And so, yeah, if you are just looking for a rip-roaring good time, this is the book for you. Next up, when we're still in 4-star territory, we have A Study in Scarlett by Arthur Conan Doyle. Sorry, I have an assistant in the background. And this is the first Sherlock Holmes novel, and I listened to this on Audrey, which is an audio app with a difference, because you have the audio, but it gives you little snippets of information throughout your reading experience. So whether that's articles or photos or voice clips to deepen your understanding of the story and the time that it was written and what's happening in the plot and what was happening with Arthur Conan Doyle throughout. And it's so fabulously done. They do this for many classics. So if you are looking to read a classic but you would like to read it with a bit more substance around the edges, then definitely give Audrey a go. It's a fantastic app, and I've read 2 books through this app now, and it's just brilliant. But the book itself, I had read it before. It was my second time reading it, and I got some real nostalgic vibes. I mean, the first meeting of Sherlock Holmes and Watson just is brilliant. It's so fantastic. I could read that scene again and again. I think what maybe some people don't know about this book in particular is that it's split into two parts. We have the sort of setup of the mystery at the beginning, and then we sort of flash back to Utah, America, to see actually what led to the situation that we're in the mystery. So it's quite a divided book, but I quite enjoyed it. Once I sort of got over the whiplash, you almost feel like you're reading a different book halfway through the book, but it does all come together at the end, and yeah, I just really enjoyed it, and I think just for nostalgia vibes alone, it does well for me. In at number 2, we have Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. This is a retelling of Kaikeyi's perspective, who is a character within the Ramayana, which I have not read, and this is exactly the sort of book I love. I don't know the original story. You don't need to know the original story. I know roughly some of the characters, Rama and Sita. I know I learned something about them when I was in primary school, but it's about a different character, and we're very much focused on her life and her perspective, and that's what I like in retellings like this. What I hate is when it's billed as a retelling from a different character's perspective, but then it's not really from their perspective at all. So Kaikeyi is a young woman growing up. Her mother leaves when she is young, and she sort of grows up with several brothers. I can't remember how many, 6, 7, 8 brothers, and a father who doesn't really like girls. And she grows up in that, and then marries, leaves her kingdom, and sets up life in a whole new kingdom. And she, I believe in the Ramayana, is billed as a not very nice character. She sends Rama away, and she's an evil stepmother, and all of these sorts of things. But we see a different side to it within this. There is also a fantastical element in this where she can see the bonds between herself and other people and manipulate them, which is a really interesting addition. And I just loved the creativity of that as a magic system. And yeah, it's fantastically written. It's on the longer side, it's about 500 pages, but it keeps you reading all the way through, and it's almost sort of set in these chapters of her life, her childhood, and then her early married life, and then her in motherhood, and it's well structured. I enjoy a well structured book. One thing I would say about this one is that there is quite a lot of foreshadowing in this. I quite enjoyed that, but I think I saw Hannah at Savage Read review this and say that wasn't her jam, so I think that's definitely up to personal taste, but I quite enjoyed the foreshadowing, though it may have been a little heavy-handed in places. But yeah, brilliant book, loved it. And that takes me to my number 1 book, and this is the only book I gave 4.5 stars to in October. No 5 stars this month, unfortunately, but we are set to get a few in November. And that was Somewhere Beyond the Sea by TJ Klune. So I have done a solo review for this, so this was my hot or not pick for October, and clearly I thought it was hot. And it is the sequel to The House in the Cerulean Sea. So The House in the Cerulean Sea follows a character, Linus, who is charged with assessing a home for magical children, like an orphanage for magical children. He goes there and assesses them, and it's very cosy vibes, but with quite a lot of emphasis on children's individuality and the care system, and discrimination and all of those things. So I think it's a really well constructed book. And the second book, the one we're talking about now, is a direct continuation from the first book. So we pick up almost exactly where we left off in the first one, and it just builds on those themes really. What I really enjoyed about this one was spending more time with the children. They are so funny, and they are so well written, and there was one character in particular, Chauncey, who I would adopt myself if he wasn't a fictional green blob. So yeah, I would say if you like the first one, you're very likely to enjoy this one too. I'd say I didn't enjoy it quite as much as the first, but I I just love spending more time with these characters. They're fantastic. Arthur and Linus are a dream team, and if you need some cosy, warming fantasy vibes over Christmas to cheer you up, this is definitely the way to go. And that is it. That is all the books that I read in October. I would love to know what you read, what you liked, what you didn't like, and also if you've read any of the books that I've read. And I will leave the FOMO picks for next year from this month onwards here. So if you want to join in with FOMO, you are absolutely more than welcome. And I will see you all very soon with another one. Bye, guys.